The shadow of the U-boat blockade already cast its chill upon us. All our plans depended upon the defeat of this menace. The Battle of France was lost. The Battle of Britain was won. The Battle of the Atlantic had now to be fought.
When the war begins, the German Navy has only 23 ocean-going U-boats, but they are ready. And for their crews, there will be no phony war. From the first day when they leave to the sound of martial music for the open sea, the war will be savage, exciting, and full of action. The purpose of the U-boat is to hunt and to kill. The prey on the horizon is the signal of alert. Everyone knows by heart his particular action station. Everything now hangs on the word of the captain, who sees for all, thinks for all, and decides for all. In the first month of the war, the U-boats of Admiral Dönitz sink the aircraft carrier Courageous and some 40 merchant ships, sending 150,000 tons to the bottom.
Churchill hastens to arm British merchantmen and urgently reintroduces convoys, the age-old system of defense employed by every naval power since warfare began. The immediate responsibility for convoy organization and protection falls to Admiral Sir Percy Noble, the brilliant Commander-in-Chief Western Approaches. Every month, up to 1,000 ocean-going ships bring to Britain from all over the world the vital supplies she needs to live and to enable her to defend herself.
When the German armies invade France and occupy the whole of the Atlantic coast, this now provides new bases from which the U-boats can massacre Allied ships. German submariners refer to this period as the happy time. It is the time of the great aces, Green, Schepke, Kretschmer. Their low silhouettes almost invisible in the dark, the U-boats attack at night on the surface. The ASDIC detecting gear in the escorts is of little use against a surface U-boat. The bolder commanders, such as Kretschmer, even penetrate between the columns of the convoys to pick their victims. Between July and October 1940, the U-boats sink 217 ships, totaling some 1.5 million tons.
The convoy system is the only sure defense against the U-boat wolf packs. This method calls for the highest degree of team spirit and discipline from the merchant seaman, two qualities abundant in the British character. But it also takes courage and patience to plod for day after day from one side of the ocean to the other, from the tip of Ireland to the tip of Newfoundland, at the disheartening speed of 7 knots. A convoy is an immense floating target of 10 or more columns of 4 or 5 ships, each 500 yards apart, altogether some 6 miles wide, a mile or more long. That autumn was a disastrous time for Allied merchant shipping in the Atlantic. One convoy that left Newfoundland in October 1940 with 35 ships arrived in Britain with only 14. 21 were sunk by U-boats on the crossing. Certainly a record loss, but many convoys lost 20% of their number.
At first, a few submarine captains were very successful in this area, while all our forces were employed on anti-invasion duties. However, early in 1941, our forces became stronger, and we were able to escort further into the Atlantic. The submarines moved further out to a gap which was beyond the 600 miles from Iceland, England, and Newfoundland, and operated in that area. At that time, in 1941, the enemy started concentrating their U-boats in packs on the surface. The first U-boat to gain contact with a convoy called up the others of his team, and they attempted to get ahead of the convoy and attack it.
Thanks to ASDIC, a submarine detection system invented in the 1914-18 war, the naval escorts can detect and locate a submerged U-boat within the radius of a mile. Running in towards it, the moment can be calculated when the U-boat is directly beneath. This is the moment to release depth charges set to explode at different levels. Shaken by these salvos of depth charges, the U-boat has only one method of escaping: diving. Diving always deeper, beneath the explosions, until the crew hears the cracking of the ship's plates.
In the spring of 1941, the escorts strike back against the U-boats. Between March and October, they sink 17. It is the end of the happy time, the end of the aces. 1942 is another year of triumph for the German U-boats. A second happy time. It It is the year of long trips across the Atlantic. The U-boats have no opportunity to return to port and have to carry out all repairs at sea as best they can.
A merchant navy officer who sailed in 12 Atlantic convoys is John Harvey.
Well, the nights were on balance more dangerous than the day. Most of the U-boat attacks or air attacks, if you were near enough to the coast, seemed to come at night. But you had to get used to these things. You slept according to the cargo you carried. I remember particularly that if you were carrying a cargo of, say, iron ore, you knew that if the ship was torpedoed, it would go down in about 20 seconds. So you slept fully clothed, your cabin door wedged open, a life jacket alongside you, and you hoped that if there was an explosion, you'd be able to rush out on deck before the ship went under. If you were carrying high explosives, you got into your pajamas, closed your cabin door, and had a normal night's sleep. And if you were still there in the morning, you hadn't been torpedoed.
Dönitz now uses every means at his disposal to sink more and more ships. His motor torpedo boats attack like wasps as convoys skirt the British coast. With a crew of 3 or 4 men, a motor of 2,000 horsepower, and only their torpedoes as a load, they skim the waves at 65 miles an hour. They come in and take up positions off the Thames estuary, waiting for passing shipping. And after launching their torpedoes, they return at full speed towards the French coast.
1943 marked the turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic. In the spring of that year, for the first time, convoys enjoyed air as well as surface escort throughout their voyages. In addition to Sunderland flying boats, Coastal Command of the RAF at last received sufficient of the long-range aircraft which had up to now been reserved for the bomber offensive over Germany. The combination of air and surface escort sent the U-boat loss rate rocketing. By April, 1 U-boat was being lost for every 3 escorted ships sunk. In May alone, surface and air escorts destroyed 25 U-boats. Dönitz confessed that losses had reached unbearable heights. But by now, under the supreme direction of Winston Churchill, the U-boat menace is almost at an end. With surface and aerial protection, convoys carry into Britain the tanks, guns, and the men who will soon liberate Europe. The U-boats try a final assault, but they're massacred by attacks from patrolling aircraft and ships.
The end came suddenly. On the 4th of May, Admiral Dönitz gave the order to the U-boats to return to Germany. And then on the 8th of May, he ordered them to come to the surface and surrender to the British. His last signal read,
"You have fought like lions. Now I must give you the hardest order of your career. To rise to the surface, hoist a large black flag, and surrender to the enemy."
The majority of U-boat commanders couldn't believe the order. 221 of them scuttled their vessels. And when the final count was taken, only 156 out of the original 700 U-boats were ever found.
Surrendered U-boats are escorted into Allied ports. And the British can at last study these wolves who for so long have terrorized the Atlantic. During the course of 6 years of war, they had sunk, by gunfire and torpedo, 2,771 Allied ships, 14.5 million tons.